Education reform. It's a topic that literally touches all of us, right? But man, the systems governing it can feel incredibly dense and, let's be honest, heavily debated. So today, we're going to cut right through the noise. Welcome to this explainer, where we're looking directly at recent critiques and public statements from the Equity Foundation, which is an organization working on the ground in the UK, particularly in Wales. By digging into their specific concerns, we can uncover some seriously fascinating insights into the structural pressures that are facing students, teachers, and families today. Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1, a different education company, 2, the new GCSE pressures, 3, reframing SEND support, 4, outdated exams and AI, and finally, 5, a vision for inclusion. Let's get right into it. Section 1, a different education company. To really understand their critiques, we first need to establish a baseline of who exactly the Equity Foundation is. Now, according to their own materials, they describe themselves as a different kind of education company, and that's because they aren't some commercial supply company just out to make a profit. Actually, they're a nonprofit entity established with help from the Wales Cooperative Centre. Their core mission is all about providing bespoke, tailored education staff and services to schools, local authorities, and families. And the whole thing is rooted in this really equitable, fair philosophy in business. You can really see this ethical mandate in action when you look at their accreditations. I mean, before we even dive into their educational critiques, these credentials speak volumes. They're an accredited living wage employer, they hold the Good Business Charter, they're a disability-confident employer, and they've actually signed the Welsh Government's Code of Practice for Ethical Employment in Supply Chains. This kind of structural commitment to fair pay and inclusive practice is basically the bedrock of how they view the wider education system. All right, moving right along to Section 2, the new GCSE pressures. Let's see how that baseline informs their take on our first major educational debate. To set the stage here, the Foundation recently pointed to this exact BBC News report. It basically outlines how teachers on the ground are finding the new exam formats just completely overwhelming. And here's the thing. The Foundation notes that while they are super concerned about these reports, they aren't exactly surprised by them. In fact, they point out that they explicitly warned about these unintended consequences back during the consultation phase for the reformed GCSEs. Think back to your own exam days, or maybe the stress your kids are dealing with literally right now. So what exactly did they warn about? Well, Equity flagged a huge increase in the volume of mandatory content and a massive expansion of non-exam assessments, or NEA. They pointed out that these coursework-style elements are now being required within incredibly tight time windows. They even specifically noted that the new GCSE English specification reads more like an undergraduate's course. The Foundation argues that the current model is deeply flawed, mainly because it assumes this consistent, uninterrupted progress from every single student. And, that just doesn't reflect the reality of schools today. And that brings us to a really profound takeaway from their whole analysis. A system without margins for disruption creates a structural lack of resilience. Think about it. What happens when a kid gets sick, or if there's a sudden family emergency? The Foundation argues that demanding continuous, super high workloads leaves absolutely zero room for real-world disruptions. The predictable result here is a heightened risk of inequity. It creates this stark divide between learners who have the resources and support to maintain that relentless pace and those who simply cannot. Next up is Section 3, Reframing SEND Support. This tackles a highly politically charged topic that's all over the media right now. Looking at this debate neutrally, the Foundation recently broke down a piece from The Telegraph. The newspaper basically framed rising SEND costs, that's special educational needs and disabilities, as an unaffordable racket, portraying it as this huge burden on public finances. But Equity, they push back hard on that framing. They define SEND support as a statutory legal right, grounded specifically in the Children and Families Act 2014 and the Equality Act 2010. In fact, they describe the word racket as a deliberate and dangerous dog whistle, designed to imply that families are somehow out there gaming the system. Now, there is one specific piece of data the Foundation brings up that absolutely stops you in your tracks. Over 95% of tribunals rule in parents' favor regarding SEND support. I just want you to let that sink in for a second. 95%. Equity uses that massive statistic to just completely flip the narrative. Their argument is pretty straightforward. If 95% of parents are winning their appeals in a tribunal, well, families clearly aren't gaming the system. Instead, they are desperately surviving a system that is failing to provide adequate, early support. They argue that rising numbers of care plans actually reflect greater awareness, better diagnosis, and really strong parental advocacy,
not systemic abuse.
So, according to the Foundation's analysis, the actual systemic issues here have nothing to do with greedy families. Instead, they point the finger at underfunded mainstream schools, super inconsistent decision-making across different local authorities, and a growing mismatch between what students actually need and the provision that's available. Replacing firm legal protections with vague promises of early help, they argue, is really just a rollback of rights disguised as reform. The real focus needs to be on fixing those structural funding and consistency gaps.
Okay, bringing us to Section 4, Outdated Exams and AI. Let's look at the modernization of assessments and the definitely controversial use of artificial intelligence. This rhetorical question hits the nail right on the head when it comes to equity's frustration with current exam boards. They ask, how many modern jobs out there say, hey, you have 2 hours, you can't collaborate, you can't check your notes, no tech, don't stand up, don't even look out the window. Oh, and you won't know the result for 3 months. They argue that we are desperately clinging to an adversarial system of testing that bears absolutely no resemblance to the modern workplace or the jobs these young people are actually going to pursue. And that leads us right into their critique of how technology is actually being used today. Instead of leveraging exciting AI tech to create bespoke, tailored assessments where learners can really shine, the Foundation points out that the exam board's brightest idea is just to use it as a big brother invigilator. I mean, they are taking 19th century assessment models and just slapping modern surveillance onto them. Even worse, the Foundation notes that this kind of automated, rigid invigilation has zero consideration for students with additional learning needs, or ALN, which is a term often used alongside SEND in Wales. And that just deepens the inequities already built into the system.
Pulling all these threads together, we arrive at our final section, Section 5, A Vision for Inclusion. So what's the ultimate takeaway from all these systemic critiques? Whether we're talking about the relentless pace of the new GCSEs, the legal rights around SEND funding, or slapping AI onto outdated exams, the source material keeps coming back to one central idea. Education has to be viewed as an investment in inclusion. It is not a financial drain, and it is certainly not some standardized assembly line. The Foundation's stance is that when we support children properly, they thrive, academically, socially, and economically. True reform just has to be built on empathy, hard evidence, and the unwavering belief that every single child matters.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. Take a look at the structures around you, whether that's in your own education or maybe your kids. Are we actually innovating, or are we just putting a shiny new technological coat of paint on a broken 19th century machine? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope these insights helped clarify a complex debate, and I encourage you to keep questioning the structures around us. Until next time, stay curious.